Why don't we get started? Good morning, everyone. I'm Vats Srivatsan, President and CEO of ColorTokens, and today we are talking about Zero Trust adoption and a complete guide to it. I have with me a very distinguished guest speaker from Forrester. David, do you want to give a little bit of introduction of yourself before we launch into the discussion?
Vats, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I'm David Holmes. I'm an analyst at Forrester Research, and I'll do a little bit of a longer intro for myself in a bit. But I'm really excited to be here. Love to talk about Zero Trust.
Very good. Thanks, David. Welcome here. So I just wanted to, we have live audience participation in this, and what we wanted to do was just set the stage. I thought I'll ask some questions from what David is observing from an external market perspective, so he can then talk a bit about Forrester's view on Zero Trust and what he's saying. I'll talk a bit about what ColorTokens is, and David can ask me a few questions, and then we'll open it up for like Q&A and answer any questions that the audience might have. So with that, David, maybe I can set you up with a few questions. Largely, Zero Trust is used, almost overused, and I would say abused at this point. But Forrester, I would take credit with coming up with the term Zero Trust in the first place several years ago. How have you seen the Zero Trust, the philosophy evolve over time? What have you seen vendors do, and how do you define Zero Trust? Maybe you can spend a few minutes, sharing your perspective from the market.
Sure. And I'll get into some of this with my slides, but it was actually about 2009 that the initial Forrester paper on Zero Trust came out. And I remember I was a younger man then, and I got somebody gave me a bootleg copy of that of the document, and that described Zero Trust. And I thought, well, we have been doing everything wrong in cybersecurity this whole time, and this Zero Trust model describes a better way forward. Right. And Zero Trust at the time was very, very network centric, but it has changed. It has evolved over the years. And I'll talk a little bit about, where that evolution has happened, both from kind of the market and the way Forrester describes Zero Trust. But it definitely has been an evolution, and it hasn't stood still. And the fact that we are here today on this webinar, and I am the sort of representative for Zero Trust, it blows my mind sometimes, because it didn't seem like that long ago, 2009, 2010, when I was just that kid reading the Zero Trust paper from John Kinderbug.
Yeah, that's right. And John, I think, deserves a lot of credit for coining the term Zero Trust when nobody knew what it meant. And it's certainly come a long way. David, yes.
I'm going to try to share my screen. Are you seeing like the nice Forrester road there?
Yes.
Okay, good. So Vats, do you want me to just jump in? And
yeah, jump right in.
All right, fantastic. So everybody, if you don't know Forrester, we are the research firm. We help security decision makers make technological decisions to drive their growth in their business, right? And we are the ones who do Forrester Waves, where we do evaluative research in a particular technology field, and we choose these are the leaders and these are the strong performers, et cetera, et cetera. And I like to think of these waves as everyone in there is the best, right? These are the top vendors in the field. We just happen to be saying, these ones are better at this and these ones are better at that. Here's my bio slide. So I cover Zero Trust. I'm one of two analysts at Forrester who covers Zero Trust. I also cover both the access part, what we call Zero Trust network access, and I cover the network part, which is microsegmentation. But I also have a long history in networking and network security. So I tend to cover things like DNS or DDoS or encryption of data in transit. And I love to speak and love to travel. So I got to speak at both this year's RSA, and then 2 years ago, it was literally 2019. So anyway, that's me. If you're a Forrester client, you can always reach out and set up an inquiry with David Holmes. So let me talk just a minute about the evolution of Zero Trust, and I won't belabor this, I promise. We'll go quickly. So in the original paper for Zero Trust, there were laid out 3 core principles of, hey, here's how we should do things differently, right? And back then, it was very much the concept of all networks should be considered untrusted. And Vats probably remembers this, but 15, 20 years ago, if you had like the inside of the network, everything was just trusted in there. Connections could be made and you didn't necessarily apply security, right? And that's very much what a big part of the problem was. So the first core principle was don't trust anything just by the fact of where it's coming from in the network, which was revolutionary talk at the time. The second core principle is least privilege access must be enforced. And while it sounds like that's a networking thing too, it's actually, when done properly, applies to people and roles and any kind of action where something needs to be authorized. And then lastly, while the initial papers didn't use the term assume breach, that came later, that's really what the papers were saying is be sure you have machinery in place to be able to detect and monitor everything. So those are the 3 core principles, and they're still true today. No matter what you are doing in Zero Trust, these core principles are still the same. And if you wanted to make a bumper sticker out of it, it would be never trust, always verify. And you could modify that first principle to just say, trust should be granted explicitly based on identity, which is a much more modern way of saying it, right? And while the initial papers were very network centric, and part of the reason for that, as I alluded to, was because the network was the problem. That was like the biggest problem back then. There was just no security anywhere, right? And it's practically still that way on the internet today. But we have evolved Zero Trust in the following way. And what I'm going to show you, the next slide I'm going to show you will be the most important slide you see today until we get to Vats' section. So this is how we talk about Zero Trust today. We try to do this in order to help people understand how to operationalize Zero Trust, because even before I joined Forrester, the most common question I would get from people about Zero Trust is, hey, I like the sound of this. How do I get started? Right. And that's what I'm about to lead into. So the way we talk about Zero Trust today is we divide it into different domains. And at the center of these domains is data, because this is the thing you're actually trying to protect, right? You're trying to protect data, so it's at the center of everything. And so you need to have security controls around the data, but you also need to have security controls around the 4 things that interact with the data. And those are people, devices, networks, and workloads. So of those 5 things, right, think of those 5 domains as these are where I need to be watching. And we also think you need to be able to correlate events. So let's say something happening on the network may be correlated to an action that is actually happening in HR or EX, to determine, what is this person doing? And is it have anything to do with the fact that they just announced their resignation, right? And then lastly, we think that you need to have orchestration and automation, because if you are not automating your defenses, you will not be able to keep up with the attackers who automate everything. Now, the reason I said this slide is so important is because this isn't just the way that we think about Zero Trust. This is the way everyone thinks about it now. So if you read NIST papers, if you have consultants come in who are going to help you with a program, they will show you some version of this, right? Some of the largest companies in the world with the largest service units, they will be showing you this as their approach for Zero Trust. So understand that the conceptual model I've laid out here for talking about the different domains helps you figure out, how do I get from point A to point B? Now, I had mentioned in my bio slide, I cover some of the different technologies of Zero Trust, and one of them is Zero Trust Network Access. I just published a wave on this 2 or 3 months ago, right before I went on paternity leave. And I see that technology is about connecting people to workloads in a Zero Trust fashion. Another technology you might see out there, you'll see it in the market, called Secure Service Edge. At Forrester, we call it a Zero Trust Edge. And that's about kind of connecting people, networks, and workloads all together. Very much that and ZTNA are kind of remote workforce and applying Zero Trust principles to help them get their jobs done, but also keep everything secure. And then the last one that I have a feeling we're going to talk a little bit about today is microsegmentation, which is in my mind, the marquee technology for zero trust. Like this concept didn't even exist prior to the zero trust papers, at least for internet networks. And I have a wave coming up on this, and it will publish in March 2022. So if you want to see who I think are the, dozen or so most important vendors in this space, watch for the Forrester wave. I'm sure that you'll see, if you follow me on LinkedIn or whatever, you'll see me talking about it. But I also wanted to talk just a little bit about building a zero trust program, because that's the title of this webinar, right? How do you get to having zero trust adoption? And there was already underway those people who would ask me, David, I like the sound of the zero trust. How do I get started, right? So those people were at the very beginning of the journey. Then there were some people who were starting to get ready. We need to do zero trust at our organization. Can you help us? So we analysts at Forrester wrote this report called A Practical Guide to a Zero Trust Implementation that really talks about building a program and how do you get from point A at the very beginning to somewhere on your journey. And let me share some of the insights from this report. Remember that diagram I showed you with the 7 circles, right? With data being at the center, and then the 4 domains: people, devices, networks, and workloads. When you go to get started on building your roadmap, the first thing you do is figure out what is your maturity already, right? So many organizations don't realize they already have a lot of the tools in place that could get them to, pretty significantly into a zero trust journey if they were using it correctly. So determine what your level is. Now, if you were to say, okay, let's consider 0 to be, I don't have any capability in this, and 5 to be, I'm super great at this, right? Whatever this thing is, a 5 is, we have a program in place that's all automated and documented and defined, and we review our metrics quarterly, and we use those metrics to optimize, right? You don't ever see that in real life, but it is a goal you could get to, and it is sort of the ceiling. But anyway, of these 5 or 7 domains, figure out what your maturity level is, and let's say it's all like 1.7, right? Somewhere between 1 and 2. You could decide, well, our goal is to get to 3 in 2 years or 10 quarters or something like that, something reasonable. And then your next thing is deciding, okay, well, we have a goal. We know where we are. Maybe you're at, if you were at 0s for all of these, or maybe you knew you were at 2s for devices and network, you could build a roadmap to say, we're going to start on identity and access management first. We're going to get that up to a 3. And while we're doing that, then we're going to kick off zero trust for workloads. And then quarter after that, we're going to kick off devices and network, and we'll build our roadmap like this, right? And this makes it to the point where you can do the same old project management you do for anything else, and then arrive, hopefully, at zero trust. So on this diagram here, where I put the maturity phase and the axis, the reason I put identity and access management first is because, well, we don't tend to give out blanket advice like everyone should do this part first. When we talk to people, we talk about what the requirements are and their environment is, and try to give them some bespoke advice. But ultimately, we find that afterward, what most clients decide to do is they decide to focus on, well, let's get our centralized management for identities in place first, because that's such a major part of zero trust. And I would say over the last year and a half that this has changed, in that by the time we get to, we're starting to talk to them now, they're already somewhere between a 2 and a 3 on that. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's what you're seeing too. If people are starting to have a much better identity and access management in place.
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly over the last few years, as zero trust has evolved, but people are starting to get identity. I'll talk a bit more about it and how we are seeing it as we get into it. But yeah, I think identity has almost become the center point of what you trust and who you trust. And,
right.
and it's become critical both at the user level as well as the machine to machine level. What you
yeah,
trust.
that might be the next frontier.
Right.
Is they have made progress on the the user identities, and that's great, right? And that's fantastic, and we all want to see that. And I guess if there are some dependencies here, there's definitely a dependency on the people part. Like you really do need to have a robust identity and access management and know everybody on the network before you can start laying out zero trust. So at any rate, I was saying very often this was the choice for people who were trying to choose what are we going to do. But now we're finding we come in and they're like, oh well, we're already at a 2 there, and the roadmap we already have is going to get us to a 3. So then it becomes a question of what do I choose next, right? And some of the things we recommend are try to choose things that give you kind of a quick win, because if you're building a zero trust program and initiative, you want to be able to show to the organization, hey, we already fixed some things. So don't pick like maybe the hardest ones next, or choose something like we're going to roll out multi-factor authentication to everybody, including partners and contractors. A project like that can bring great visibility across the organization as everyone sees, oh, I now have to use multi-factor. We must be doing a better job of cybersecurity now. And thank goodness that works as well as it does today, because that's, I'm sure you remember 15 years ago or 10 years ago, what trying to do single sign-on and multi-factor was like. I mean, it was a nightmare. Now it's relatively easy among all the things you have to do. Am I right?
And it's the norm. Without multi-factor, you generally can't access any application across the board. So it's a testimony how security has evolved, how people have evolved to their processes and their behavior, to what is needed across the board. Absolutely.
Yep. And we have made a ton of progress. I know the headlines are always about breach, 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 and it's some kind of parade of misery. But in reality, when you go out there and you look, we as an industry have made some progress. And a lot of that is aligned to zero trust, right? And which is great. So the whole world is sort of slowly moving in this direction. And it's been accelerated by by two things recently, is the NIST Special Publication 800-207, which is zero trust architectures. I think there were a lot of agencies around the world who were just waiting for NIST guidance to get going. And then, of course, the Biden executive order, which the follow-on to that has been the many agencies of the largest government in the world now have a mandate to move towards zero trust. And that consumes a lot of the conversations that I have today, is such and such agency would like a discussion on on how to get started with zero trust. So at any rate, once you have a general idea of what your maturity level is, you can build your roadmap, right, and align it to the other initiatives that you might be happening. And in the document that I was referencing, the Practical Guide to a Zero Trust Implementation, we lay out, here's what a sample roadmap would look like, so that you don't forget to do things like identify critical assets, or, well, first of all, set up the program, right? And one of the things you can do from the roadmap that you built and from the maturity level that you gained through your assessment is figure out what's the percentages of where our budget should go. And you should target your money toward if you're really lagging in device security, maybe you got like a 0.9 or something on that maturity and you want to get it to a 3, you would at least know, what, we need to put more money into this, and that should be reflected in the roadmap that you build. So if you are an organization that is looking to build a full zero trust initiative or program, or you're one of these agencies that says where you have a mandate, or you think a mandate's coming, where you're like, I have to start getting on board with this. This is very likely a process that you will go through. And if you end up getting consulting help for this, they will probably walk you through something very, very similar to what I've described today. And then if you're not doing a full zero trust program, and about a third of the calls I take are people who are just interested in, hey, I want to apply zero trust to the network. Like, we're the network team and we want to understand zero trust so that we can do our network piece. I talk a fair bit about that with clients, and the exciting news there again is that the microsegmentation wave will be coming out. And you might ask, well, David, is there a different way to do zero trust that's not microsegmentation? And while I didn't bring any slides for that, let me just talk about that briefly, right? In these conversations I'm having with people who want to do more zero trust on the network, one of their big drivers is I'm trying to stay ahead of ransomware. And the problem with ransomware is once ransomware gets inside through your firewall via email or whatever threat vector it gets in through, if it can land, one of the things it will try to do is infect its peers on the subnet, right? And two famous examples of this where it is malware using the 0 days eternal blue, and then some RDP vulnerabilities, Bluekeep, I think they were called, to infect peers on the same subnet. And if you know anything about networking, in a network where peers are effectively in the same subnet, there's no security device that sits in between them. They can just talk at each other. And so while some people would come in and say, what if we resegmented our network? Well, it doesn't really, it might, a better segmentation might contain the problem a little bit so that only everything on that subnet over there got infected. But it doesn't really get down to the microsegmentation level, which is saying everybody on this subnet should not be able to talk to each other. So if you have a whole row of workstations, there's actually no reason they should actually be able to talk to each other at all, right? They're all talking to Office 365 and applications and et cetera, et cetera. They shouldn't be talking at each other, and microsegmentation can be something that sits in place and prevents that from happening. So very, very excited about this wave coming up and to see all the different solutions in here. And I think that might've been that was the last slide that I had brought, Vats, but I'm interested to hear, as I turn it over to you, you are talking with high profile customers all day long, I assume. And so you probably have a similar pulse on what is on everyone's mind as they're trying to approach zero trust, network security. What does the remote work look like in the future? What's the future of work? How do I protect my applications? All of those things.
Yeah, no, David, that was fantastic. Thanks for giving an overview of zero trust. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, things have come a long way since the term was coined, and the industry has moved with identity in particular into a point where actually zero trust becomes possible. Let me start a bit with how do we see zero trust in the context of what you just said, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we are seeing with customers as we talk to them and some of the challenges they face in the journey and what we try to do to help them navigate that journey better. First, a bit of zero trust, and this this is not quite the same diagram, but quite consistent with what you were talking about earlier. Zero trust at its essence means that you only allow things that you trust. As you said, the never trust and always verify kind of that lingo appears, and zero trust to us, means only allowing trusted. And we look at it in terms of three things. One, the data or the application, that uses the data are critical, and there is trust to be enforced in terms of what interactions you allow that applications to have, or what is allowed to interact with that application or data. And you want to make sure that you only allow trusted interactions to happen in that piece. Now, as you rightly pointed out, that is not enough, particularly when you look at ransomware and things that can move laterally within the subnet, as has happened. We also think in terms of trusted processes. What can run on that VM or that server in terms of the processes that can execute that are trusted and that are trusted across the board. And the third comes down, as you said, user identity is a very critical part of it. And while we don't serve, we use identity provided by the providers, we build on that to say who can access and what are the users that can access and what access privileges do they have, so that you only allow trusted users with the right privileges to access the applications we have. So we look at zero trust broadly as those three elements together. And in reality, the challenge for many organizations is, on the one hand, the data that if a particular piece of data leaks and it has employee data, as you know, or company data, the damage could be very, very broad. Could just be one system that is breached, but the damage could be enormous, not only affecting that company, but as we've seen in ransomware, sometimes affecting the entire ecosystem. So on the one hand, there is how do you balance the risk that is posed in the leakage of the data? The other part of it is, how do you do it without disrupting the business velocity? Because at the end of the day, a completely air-gapped system on one extreme will give you the protection you want, but that severely limits the velocity of what you're able to do. On the other hand, the way internet was designed in its pure form, you allow everything to interact to everything, is great for velocity, great for convenience, but then it poses a whole bunch of security risks. So at the crux of it, there is this trade-off, and we provide a platform that helps people get to that right trade-off as they think about the trust. Now, you asked a great question of what do our customers see? We did a survey of about 3,000 customers, and I'll also add into it what we are seeing with some very large customers that we talk to on a continuous basis in terms of what they are. So first, with the promise of the zero trust. So what is it that they like about zero trust? Because, you see the spectrum.
Hey, Vats, if my eyes are old, can you put it in presentation mode? So,
yeah, sorry.
Otherwise, I'll have to sit very, very close to my screen, and my face will consume the entire.
That should be good now.
Oh, much
good.
Better. Thank you.
Better. Thank you. So, so on zero trust, where is the opportunity and promise of zero trust? Many customers, the number one thing they like about zero trust is that it's a proactive approach. It's a bit different than other approaches that exist today, and different in a good way for many people that basically view it as proactive rather than having to react to attacks all the time. How can we be ahead of more sophisticated attacks? They also think that that might be the only way we counter zero-day attacks and signatures that have not been seen before, across the board. There is as security, many of you know, and there are many, many terrific vendors that have talked about this problem, is there is a problem of false positives. There is 99% false positive, and the 1% of the 1% that really you miss is the one that could be problematic. So security runs in this issue of false positive. That is, security professionals are one of the most sought after in this industry. And so there is this problem of we have limited skill resources, trained against a whole bunch of false alerts. There are some folks that look at zero trust because somebody in management asked them to do, but that's very little. I mean, people are independent. They do it because they believe that it's security. So the promise of zero trust, it can be summed up. In fact, one of our board members, Tony Scott, was a former federal CIO, and I was talking to him a bit about this. And he said, look, I wish we had something like zero trust when I was the CIO, because in a sense, it's an unequal battle. I have to be right 100% of the time and cover 100% of the surface, whereas the adversary has to be just right 1% of the time. And any vulnerability that I have, is an opportunity for somebody to exploit. What we try to do is, if you look at security overall, there is a lot of terrific solutions to point problems that happen. So people try to cover every single surface that they might be exposed to. And the challenge that causes is that you sometimes are reactive, and then all of that information has to be aggregated and from their silos analyzed, and then you have to do it. We've tried to change the paradigm a bit with saying, can we try to define a platform that allows people to define the trust up front, and then start from that perspective to say, what do you allow that is getting trusted, or what was trusted before and that's not trusted anymore because the risk kind of increased. So one other thing I thought I'd share from customers is, what makes zero trust difficult as a journey, because it is a journey. It's not a single point in time, because attackers are not sitting still. There are three things that rose to the top in terms of where customers are struggling with zero trust. One is the complexity of this in any decent size enterprise is mind-boggling. You have thousands of assets. You have millions of interactions between those assets. You have literally trillions of transactions. So if you think of 10,000 servers communicating to another 10,000 servers, another 10,000 internet sites, effectively you have a hugely complex problem with point solutions for different elements of it. Then you also have, people listed that their environment changes frequently. I mean, they are either going to the cloud or they are doing upgrades, they are doing, they're adding a new application, they're adding a new machine. Nobody works in a static environment. So part of they thought was that technical complexities, the scale and the change needs to be encompassed in a solution. The second piece, which is very intuitive, I think, David, for you, because you see this all the time, is while solutions point to specific segments, people are in brownfield environments, not greenfield. So a lot of people, and I had the opportunity to see this from the ground floor up when I was at Google Cloud, a lot of people are migrating to the cloud from their traditional data center. Now that brings a different nuance on security, what needs to be done to protect it. But a lot of people still have legacy systems. If you talk about manufacturing companies that have factories in sprawled out places, there are systems that have not been upgraded, that have not been patched for a number of years. And all the attacker needs is one entry point through that. So people are worried about, can I cover my whole spectrum all the way from cloud native to legacy? And can you provide me the protection there? The last thing they're struggling with is, frankly, zero trust is a hype, and they've heard it, they believe in it, but there is no ROI, there is no clear ROI, and there is conflicting security projects. And what do you do first? So I'll talk a bit about how we've tried to address it, and then come back a bit on the journey and how people should approach the journey, which is the theme of this across. Now, in a solution approach, we've taken three primary tenets of how we'll define a solution to solve this problem that customers face. And when I talk to large enterprise customers, a lot of them, these themes come up continuously. So the first thing we've done is make it very easy for customers to adopt, a path to zero trust, and make it very easy for them to scale it. And how do we do it? I'll give you a couple of examples. When you go into an enterprise with 5,000 assets, they want to know what those assets are. Many times the unique identifier for the asset is the IP address that is it. But those are non-intuitive because the person who set it up, the network administrator, may know what that IP address is. But typically the business, even the CIO, is thinking in terms of applications and what level of protection you need. So one is in terms of easy tagging. So we take application tags that are available, with the IP addresses, with tags that they might exist in other systems they may have. We put it together in terms of automatically allowing people to tag their assets in a very intuitive way that allows you to define policy. We also group it. We define groups or segments, as David's saying, that take away the complexity. Because if you start to define policy at the trillion transaction level, then you are in a world of hurt in terms of ability scale. So we group it and allow you to define policy in group, while the enforcement still happens at a detail level, at the machine level. We use a lot of automation and orchestration and machine learning to automatically recommend what the group should be, automatically recommend what the policy should be. So we try to take the manual labor out of policy definition as much as we can, while still allowing the human control over the last step of approving it, because we still think that is needed at this stage of where the technology is. We've designed it so that's very easy to learn, because a lot of people spend months and years trying to put systems in place without ROI. And we literally have had customers comment that it took less than an hour for them to learn the tool, get how to use it. So we've focused a lot on the simplification of the platform to make it easy for customers to scale.
Hey, Vats, do you mind if I wanted to break in and
please
share an insight that I had meant to say earlier, but I'd forgotten about, is that some people had tried to approach this problem in a manual fashion, to say, I'm going to identify my applications and then figure out how they all talk to each other, what the data paths are, and then I'm going to resegment around that. And my advice is, don't do that, because it is extremely complicated to do. And no one knows exactly how these things all talk to each other, right? You might be tempted to say, well, such and such group owns that application. I'm going to tell them to tell me how it all works and what hosts talk to each other. They don't know. I promise you, they don't know. They just keep it running. And if you rely on them, you will get back an inaccurate picture, and then you would build policy that doesn't actually say that's not tight enough, or worst case could break something. The way to do this today is to automate it with a solution that can sit for a while and watch, and it goes, I've identified 28 applications. This is how I think they all talk to each other. This is what the policy should be. Do you want to enforce this policy? And then it's, a yes or no button, rather than manually going out and trying to figure out what are all
It's
the
impossible.
right. I talked to somebody who did it manually once, and he said it took him a year to map 10 applications. I said, well, how many applications do you have? He said, we have 200. I said, well, you're going to spend the rest of your career doing this? You can't do that, right? No one has that kind of time.
Exactly.
It has to be an automated.
You're spot on. You're spot on, David. And that is exactly because, and that's a challenge that people have, as security professionals have, is it's just impossible with the complexity to map it manually, as you said. And so we are investing in automation. The second thing we're doing is we're recognizing customers have their own environments. Most of them are hybrid. Most of them are multi-cloud. Most of them have data centers. Most of them have legacy applications. So we're trying to create a unified view of the risks across all of that surface and make our platform agnostic to what OSs you use, what networks to use, obviously within limits. If you're still using an OS from the 50s, it's probably going to be tough for us to support. But in general, we have customers that are very modern customers, I would say, but have still running Windows 2003 in their environment. We've had particularly government agencies still have a lot of applications that they are running on legacy and pieces. So we try to meet customers in that environment and try to design for the hybrid piece, all the way from cloud native to legacy. And the last thing which is important is this is a journey, and it's a tough journey with a lot of entry points. So we try to make it easier for customers to progressively dial up zero trust posture. I'll pick on one thing David said, which is allowing simulate and learn. So we have the ability to say, let's allow the learning to happen from your transactions to assign what the trust is. We can also say we have some standard templates of what this application should be talking to, and therefore let's start from there and allow to learn in your environment. Or there are customers that say, look, security is number one, and this typically happens if you've unfortunately had a breach, that let's lock down everything that could potentially be damaging. And so I need a tool to instantly lock down anything that could be dangerous to my most critical applications. So we'll allow people, the customers, to do it. And frankly, very different customers to different paths here, because some do not want business disruption. So they start from a, let's disrupt the business the least and try to tighten up security and learn more and more as to what will be less disruptive, but could be a risk, and dial that down. On the other hand, some people take the approach, particularly they're in highly secure environments, particularly they're used to coming from air-gapped environments and moving the other way, to saying, let's lock down everything and then let's open up based on things establishing trust over time. So we allow both modes in terms of where things are. And I'll just conclude with a couple of things on our platform. David, any other thoughts or comments? Well,
keep going, Vats.
Got it. Let me just take two more minutes and talk a bit about our platform, then I'll open it up for discussion. We will do a quick demo for a couple of minutes. Stephen will join, and then we'll open up. Our platform largely, I talked about, what we do, starting from the right to the left. We look at workload, application, and data flows, and we try to secure that through something called X-Shield, which is one of the products in our platform. And many customers use that as a starting point to say what interactions are happening in the first place. Visibility sometimes is important because people have set up the routers, they set up the rules, but yet you have transactions going on to a nation that you don't want those transactions to happen to. So it starts with visibility, but the more important thing is around the policy and automated policy definitions of what should be interacting with each other. And we go all the way from containers and serverless on the cloud native environments to platform as a service, microservices, to data centers where we allow automatic grouping, automatic policy definitions. Going from right to left, then we look at user access. That goes a bit into the zero trust network access space in your chart, but we allow users privileged access into specific applications in a more intelligent way than any VPN does. So it's not in or out, but you, David, can access this application because you need it for the main course of work you do. You need timed access into another set of applications because you need it temporarily. So you're trying to put some more intelligence into what user access. And obviously then, on the process side, we use something that's X-axis. And then on the process side, we have something called X-Protect that limits processes that can run. This is particularly critical for customers that have had ransomware attacks or afraid of it, or where they may have a big, surface already that they fear something might have penetrated across the board. Even when I talk to federal agencies, they go with the assumption that somebody is somewhere in the network and I need to protect all my critical assets in that. And with X-Protect, we allow only privileged, trusted processes to run. And we can do that both on the server side as well as the endpoint side that some of the endpoint vendors do. So we provide a black platform. And in many cases, in some cases, customers say, look, well, can you provide the whole thing as a service? Because we don't have people to manage all of this. And there we have Xassure, which provides a service that cuts across the board. We really focus on, obviously for any company, revenue, those kind of metrics are important. And for us, particularly as a growth company, it's quite important as we do it. But we really focus on customers and are we solving their problems and are they satisfied with it? We are very blessed to have a very high customer service, satisfaction rate of about 90%. We have a lot of patents that are really focused around the simplification of this in an enterprise setting. And so that's basically the technology that we provide. I'm going to switch gears a bit and allow Stephen maybe to introduce himself. And maybe I've talked a bit in concept. It'll be much easier to see what it looks like in the product. And so, Stephen, if you don't mind, maybe we can switch to your video.
Absolutely, Vats. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Pestian, and I'm a designer for the ColorTokens platform. Today, I'm thrilled to give you all a sneak peek at what we've been working on for X-Shield 2.0. From onboarding clouds, workloads, and users, tagging and grouping, to crafting, simulating, and enforcing those policies, we spent a lot of time listening to your pain points of zero trust implementation to deliver solutions that enable you to adopt microsegmentation not only at breakthrough speed, but also at scale. I really hope you enjoy.
X-Shield 2.0 brings groundbreaking features and enhancements to accelerate your zero trust journey at scale. Let's take a look at what's new for assets, tags, grouping, and policies. We're thrilled to now support your clouds, like Azure, where onboarding your environments is a breeze. With a few inputs, we instantly connect your resources, resource groups, and subscriptions to X-Shield, supporting as many environments as you have. Once connected, your containers, storage, and other cloud resources are displayed right alongside your other workloads and users. A powerful but simple syntax we call FQL has been added, allowing you to filter your resources by subnet, location, CVE ID, and tons of other options. Assets now have their own view where you can see general data like tags, hardware details, and policies, but also critical insights like detailed vulnerabilities and exposures. Tired of tagging? Great news! All assets are now auto-tagged with subnet, location, vendor, and active running services. And of course, X-Shield will always allow you to create any custom tags that make sense to you. If you want to customize your tag automation, just use tag rules. Specify your criteria using the same FQL, and then add which tags to apply. Any asset matching the criteria will be tagged. No more manual tagging of current and future assets. Organizing and microsegmenting your assets can be difficult, especially at scale. What if your assets could group themselves? Introducing Auto Group. Select which group types you want and run. X-Shield learns about how your assets interact with each other in the outside world. Once finished, we present you with group recommendations. All you need to do is review the results and accept or edit as necessary. Now that your groups have been created, the next step to security is writing and enforcing zero trust policies for them. Rather than writing hundreds of these manually, we're letting AutoSecure do the heavy lifting. Dial in your security level, and X-Shield will do the rest. Edit and approve, just like AutoGroup. And because these policies can have a major impact to your operations, selective enforcement is here to help step you through your zero trust journey. Simulate the policy effects and enforce, level by level. Be sure to check out these great features and tons of others in Xshield 2.0 by ColorTokens.
Back to you, Vats.
Thank you, Stephen. I just wanted to end with a few things that, I know there's some customers in the audience, and they are thinking about their own zero trust journeys. From all of this and from our experience, I'd say probably zero trust is an approach you would need to adopt and your team would need to be passionate about as you go through. But there's no time to lose, because adversaries and vulnerabilities somewhere, anywhere in your system could provide an opportunity for the break. So I'd suggest getting started somewhere is better than waiting for across the board. Obviously, we try to make it very simple for customers to start by allowing different starting points, very easy ROI, so they can see it in a matter of weeks, and clear value of what the zero trust approach would bring to them. Clearly, I think, David, we'll go to Q&A, but I wanted to tee up maybe with a question for you, which we didn't cover here much. You mentioned President Biden's executive order, and we are seeing a tremendous amount of interest from corporations that, since that announcement, because it's almost like zero trust has now become mainstream, much like identity did, in terms of how people, how people view it. How are you seeing, things evolve across different countries and other geographies from when you're talking to vendors or customers across the globe?
That's a good question. So let me give you sort of a targeted answer. For the last 5 years or so, I've been kind of spending maybe a third of my time over in APAC. And in that particular region, while as tempting as it is to talk about it as if it's one conglomeration like North America, it's actually super diverse in that there's different levels of, say, technological maturity, many different cultures, and these cultures have different approaches to the concept of trust. And even the name zero trust does not resonate in many cultures over there. We recently did a prediction, I think it was at the beginning of this year or the beginning of last anyway. Our analyst over there, Janan Budge, she had predicted that one government in APAC would adopt zero trust as its overarching information security model. And she was proven right when Singapore announced that that it was going to do that. And so kudos to her. Now, I think that got overshadowed a little bit by the Biden executive order, which is sort of consuming all the oxygen from oxygen in the room as people think about what does zero trust look like in the government space, which is a wild and woolly place of tens of millions of people who will now be brought one way or the other into the zero trust world. So I think vendors and analysts and consultants and IT people are all going to be very, very busy over the next couple of years.
No, that's terrific. Because as we are seeing, actually, I'm going to be in Europe in a couple of weeks, and we're seeing there is a lot of interest from different countries. As you said, it's tough to think of Europe as one thing and Asia as one thing, because it does tend to be very different by country. We're seeing a lot of interest come into this, probably with the oxygen and the air that came out of the President Biden executive order, because I think is probably in the early stage of seeing other governments kind of follow a similar thing. There's a few questions from the audience. I want to move to that. I'll take the first one. I'll read the question out for the benefit of everyone, and David, the second one I'll ask you for it because it's a more broader question. The first question is, cybersecurity is a very competitive space. There are many companies that are offering or profit offer zero trust. How is ColorTokens different? I think that's a very good question. I think, as we all know, there is a lot of companies, and zero trust almost has become a mantra that many companies say. We also do zero trust. We approach it differently, as I said before. We approach it from the point of view of not trying to solve every problem for all the customers all the time, but solving one problem very clearly and complete enough that it goes. So for example, we talked a bit about microsegmentation, which is what interactions are allowed across a what group of applications. There are companies that really do that and do that well. But we focus there on automating it, making it very easy for the customers, because our our success point there is it becomes truly a single click, what we call one-click segmentation for the customers, because we want automation to play into Pole because it's complex. But at the same time, we don't stop there. We are providing access. We are providing process level control that enables to do that. And that complete suite gives us a good, gives us a good way to help our customers in the journey, much more than they would with other people that might be providing point solutions. So we differentiate based on making it very easy for customers to adopt. Our mission is to make sure that we get as close as possible to an autonomous system, because it's so tough to do this manually. And we feel, frankly, that the market itself is constrained because no vendor has quite figured this out and made it so easy to do. You can now adopt zero trust, not because it is difficult, but because it's so easy to do for any organizations, for any environment. And that's a bit of what we are trying to do. And that's how we differentiate, is the breadth of the offering compared to that, and the focus, the relentless focus, I would say, on making it very easy for customers at scale. The second question has to do with what role does the C-suite or the board play in the cybersecurity approach? Where do they come in? David, do you want to take a first shot, and I can add on based on my experience?
Yeah. So let me talk about the C-suite specifically. There's two approaches to projects like these, but let's say that there's the larger approach where a zero trust initiative is going to be put in place, and it's something that involves the 7 circles that I showed you earlier in the diagram. It's absolutely critical for there to be a C-level champion for this, because very likely this is going to impact the whole organization and IT specifically. And there's going to be a lot of people who have to make a lot of changes and obviously improvements. And there can be resistance to change, and people who are saying, we have all this other work, why should we focus on this? And if you lack a C-suite champion, you are more likely to run into the resistance and see the project ultimately fail. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is if you're coming at this kind of tactically, and you might have an idea that we want to improve our security posture on the network, and we're going to get a solution that does that. I did a survey recently where I asked, where does the buying activity come from? Is it coming from the network side, or is it coming from the security side? And I was kind of surprised to see it was about 1/3 network, 1/3 security, and then 1/3 other, right? It might be some like a DevOps mandates, et cetera. So I guess the broad answer is, in either of these cases, in the first case, you absolutely have to have a C-level champion. And in the second case, if you're going to get a project like this, it's probably coming from one of them anyway.
Yeah, let me add on to that, David, because I spent a lot of time in management consulting, advising C-suite across a whole range of industries on their business problems. And I would say on security and cybersecurity in particular, you will see C-suite needs to be more involved than they currently are. From a CEO perspective at an organization, or a CEO perspective, effectively, security tends to be, I talked a bit about the trade-off of velocity, business velocity, and security. From a C-suite perspective, the focus rightly is on, let's focus on the business velocity or the business metrics, growth, margins, etc. And it almost assumes security is a given. In other words, the idea here is make it all secure. That allows them to work. The challenge sometimes is that level of the level of decisions that are made down at the level of who is allowed to connect into this application, what level of access do we give the employees. Sometimes we put it on, whatever Active Directories, so whatever the IT department says, or what the HR department has in the new people. But those kind of things can come back and have a big impact on the business, because, as you said, an employee that's still in the system, that's no longer with the company, poses a huge risk and a huge endpoint. One single legacy system somewhere that's unpatched that can offer an entry point into your most crown jewel applications. So I believe that C-suite awareness of this problem is not what it should be, but I certainly agree with you that C-suite sponsorship makes it much easier for companies to start to move this thing, because it is a journey. It's a different mindset, and it does require, executive sponsorship for people to kind of push. Most of our successful applications, successful implementations have had one senior level executive, at least one, that has been passionate about changing the direction or sees the vision of what would happen if they didn't embrace this approach. So I do believe that C-suite is that. Let's take one more question. So does zero trust benefit some industries more than others? David, do you want to take again a first shot, and I'll add on?
That's a tough one. There'd be many ways to answer that. Let me just say this instead, that when you're looking across the different verticals, very often you will find that they have different environments, and securing those environments can be more complicated. So for example, in lots of manufacturing or healthcare, you might have industrial control systems or OT, operational technology, where applying zero trust principles is much, much harder. And in fact, the whole ICS space itself, the thing to protect is the process, not necessarily the data that's generated. And so we get different levels of interest in zero trust from the different verticals. I think some of the largest budgets to make transformational changes come out of the financial vertical. And so we see a lot of activity there, which completely makes sense. And to a large degree, they are very digital already. They're not dealing with heart pumps and giant manufacturing presses like those other ones are. I don't know how you would answer that one, Vats.
I'll talk to where we are seeing our customers go with this, which is zero trust. We're finding is becoming important across industries. So I'll give you, but the entry point and what they are focusing on is a bit different by industry. So let me give you a few examples. We have a retail customer. The challenge for them is they have point of sale systems that are spread across 1,000+ locations. And they want to make sure that those are basically able to only do what they're supposed to do, and that they're only able to access information they have. And so we've been helping them over 2 years at a large scale to just make sure that those only allow trusted transactions to happen back from this, and only trusted processes run, because they're not patched all the time. They cannot economically afford to patch all of them at the same time. And the healthcare side, we have a healthcare customer that basically is one of the premier. I would put them as fairly advanced in their thinking in terms of others in the industry. And they want to truly move to a zero trust posture, because they have a set of hospitals and chain. They have different employees accessing the terminals. And once an employee accesses the terminal, or contractor or third parties, they have access to a lot of the applications that are very critical in terms of patient data or disease data and other pieces. So they want to be sure that they have locked down critical applications to the point where only some people can do. Manufacturing, I talked about it. And manufacturing, the issues become, you have spread out manufacturing plants at different locations. You have different people needing access to different pieces of it. You have legacy applications, and you have third-party test suppliers that want to have access to the same environment as yours, but only for specific applications. So we are seeing zero trust take the view of, how can we protect those critical pieces of the infrastructure first. On infrastructure companies, things like airports, we're seeing a lot of interest, because you have kiosks or terminals, or in hotel, hospitality, you have a lot of, business suites and things where there are entry points for people to come in. Seems very harmless, but if once they're in, they can do it. And there the nature becomes, can we allow only access to specific things that need to be done at the points that are not there. So we are seeing broad application across industries, and financials, obviously, this is very important in terms of just getting visibility in the applications, the movement to the cloud. And so, and regulatory compliance in terms of what needs to happen. So we are seeing a lot of adoption triggered by different entry points, if you will, which is very specific to what industry and what problem they're trying to solve. So let's take one more, because this probably is the last one, since we'll run out of time.
There's so many good ones. I don't know
Yeah,
if you
there
saw
are
all
so
these
many good
questions.
ones.
These are
And
great.
what we'll do is send an answer, across to the responses offline. Let me take this one. Is, can you deploy color tokens for SMEs? What we've done is we've announced, obviously, we want to make it easy for any customer to adopt. The scale problems multiply, but the risk is the same, whether you're a small business or a large enterprise, and the nature of the risk is different. Because we make it easy and automated, it becomes very easy for SMEs to adopt as large enterprises. We've entered into a partnership, one of them being, with which is public, with Expedient, that allows us to leverage their network of thousands of customers and embed it into the full suite that they are doing. So we're taking a slightly different go-to-market approach for SMBs than for large enterprises. But we do believe the problem exists as much in big enterprises as it does in small enterprises. And clearly, small enterprises don't have the skill sets, sometimes the manpower, to be able to solve all of that things at the same. So the automation really helps across the board, but it also helps for large enterprises at different reasons. Let me pause there. And as David said, a lot of great questions, and we could probably go on for another 30 minutes. In the interest of time, I want to thank David, first of all. Thank you for being here and talking a bit about what you're observing in terms of Zero Trust. Great to chat, and hopefully we can do this next year as well. For the audience, I would say thank you for tuning in. For those that tuned in, for those that will listen to it recorded as well, hopefully you found this interesting. I can be reached at vats.srivatsan@colortokens.com, and David had his address. If you have any further questions or anything that you are thinking about in terms of your own Zero Trust journey, please feel free to reach out to us. But it was great talking to you, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vats. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.